The mountains erupted with gunfire before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. Echoes bounced through the canyon walls, rattling stone and soul alike. Sergeant Lila Vance ducked lower against the crag, but it wasn't her name they shouted. She was just a shadow among rocks, listening. Below, the platoon was caught in a trap. Lieutenant Aaron Dorsey had led his men into Sector Delta 9 before the light was full. The narrow valley felt too still, too silent, until the ridges flashed with muzzle fire. Dust spouts danced at their boots. PKM heavy machine guns barked from 400 meters, cutting the air into ribbons. Men scrambled for cover behind boulders no larger than their packs. Corporal Javier Ortiz fought the radio like it was a living thing, twisting dials, slapping the side of the unit. Static tore through his headset, drowning his own pulse. "It's jammed. Damn it, it's all static," he yelled, panic stretching his words thin. Dorsey pressed his back into rock, sweat streaking his dust-covered face. He tried to breathe, but the canyon walls were closing in, and every shout from his men was swallowed by thunderous gunfire. "Hold the line," he barked, but it sounded small against the hammer of rounds smashing stone inches from his helmet. High above, Captain Mark Rayner's A-10, call sign Falcon 1, cut across the sky. He'd been circling at 2,500 feet when the first distress flared across emergency channels. He throttled down hard, eyes locked on the canyon map grid. Delta 9. "Falcon 1 on station." His voice came flat over the net. "Mark targets." But Ortiz only screamed into dead air. Nothing came back but hissing static. The platoon tried to fire back, rifles cracking in short bursts, but the enemy positions were dug in, crossfire locking them from both ridges. Every move forward brought more sparks off stone. The air smelled of cordite and pulverized dust. Dorsey's hands trembled as he changed magazines, his jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Rayner's HUD showed nothing but shadows in stone. He squinted, banking hard into a low dive. The roar of engines filled the valley like an oncoming storm. Then the Gatling cannon spoke. A line of fire stitched across the ridge, 30mm shells tearing rock apart. Enemy guns went silent for 3 breaths, long enough for soldiers below to gasp in air. "Good run, Falcon," Dorsey muttered, even though the pilot couldn't hear. But just as fast, fresh bursts opened from the opposite slope. Tracers crisscrossed the sky, red and green threads of death. Pinned, still pinned. Rayner climbed, heart pounding. He had fuel to consider, rules of engagement, command oversight far away on clean maps. But hearing the panic in Ortiz's voice made his hand twitch back toward the dive lever again. He'd buy them seconds, if nothing more. The second strafing run shattered another nest. Men below screamed encouragement to each other, daring to raise helmets above rock. But the canyon was a death funnel. The exit path ahead was sealed tight with fire. Dorsey knew it. Rayner knew it. And then, without warning, the comms shifted. A new voice cut through. Low, calm, precise. "Shadow to Falcon 1. You're 3 degrees off. Shift fire left, 10 meters. Valley choke point is mined. Platoon will hold north edge." Ortiz froze, his hand still on the radio knob. Every man around him looked up as if the canyon itself had spoken. Dorsey's eyes went wide. "Who the hell is that? The voice came again, steady against the chaos. "Shadow to Viper Actual. I say again, pull your men to cover at grid 24/6. Use the wash behind the rocks. Enemy overwatch can't see that angle." Rayner's hand tightened on the stick. "Falcon 1 copies Shadow. Say position." No answer to that, just coordinates, clean and exact. "Move," Dorsey shouted, no longer caring who she was. If the voice had a way out, he'd take it. His men scrambled in short bursts, running low, packs slamming their shoulders. Bullets sparked behind them, chasing but missing. Ortiz stumbled and nearly dropped the radio, but Vance, unseen, unheard from her hidden vantage, whispered another correction, timing their dash between bursts of machine gun fire. Somehow, the path she painted worked. The canyon turned, bent, gave them shadows to hide in. Raynor swept low, trusting her calls, his cannon spitting fire where she directed. Dust clouds rose high, covering the platoon's retreat. His HUD blinked warnings, altitude too low, ground proximity screaming. He ignored it, jaw set. When his run ended, silence hovered for one long moment. Then the enemy guns found their breath again. But the platoon had already moved farther than they had in the last 20 minutes. They were alive, still breathing. Dorsey pressed his back to a slab of rock, chest heaving, lungs burning like dry coals. He looked at Ortiz, who stared at the radio as if it had just spoken a ghost into being. "Shadow," Ortiz whispered, almost reverent. The comms crackled again. "Hold position, more fire coming, stay low." No one asked who she was anymore. Her tone left no room for doubt. She was there, somewhere in the ridges, guiding them, and she was the only reason they weren't already bodies cooling in the dust. Raynor glanced at his fuel gauge, then at the ridgeline. "Shadow," he called, "you've got eyes on better than command. Lead it." A pause, the faint breath of a woman over static. "Copy, Falcon. I'll lead." For the first time since sunrise, Dorsey felt a thin edge of hope slide back into his chest. The valley was still a trap, the guns still alive, but someone unseen was cutting them a thread through the maze, and the thread was holding. The voice in the shadows had only just begun to change the fight. Her voice cut through the chaos like steel through smoke, clear, precise, calm where no calm should exist. Lieutenant Dorsey froze mid-command, the valley noise fading for an instant as if everyone, friend and foe alike, had paused to listen. The platoon huddled tight against the canyon wall, dust choking their throats, rifles clutched in trembling hands. Machine gun fire from the ridges chewed stone into shards. Ortiz hunched over the radio, eyes wide, headphones pressed hard against his ears. "It's her again," he whispered, voice trembling. "She's giving us roots." "Shadow to Viper actual," the voice said, unhurried despite the storm. "Advance 70 meters east. Follow the dry wash. Enemy overwatch blind from that angle. Move now." Falcon 1, circling at altitude, listened in. Captain Mark Raynor's hands tightened on the stick. He had heard plenty of chatter in his career, but nothing like this. Someone who sounded as if she could see the battlefield from every angle. "Falcon 1 copies," he said into the net, his eyes searching the ridgelines. "Shadow, state position." Silence followed, broken only by static and gunfire. Then her voice returned, ignoring the question. "Suppress ridge line at marker 3-1. Mortars staging 600 meters out. Delay on impact 3 seconds. Hit them now." Raynor's HUD confirmed movement where she described. He didn't ask how she knew. He nosed the A-10 down, engine screaming, altitude dropping fast. Crosshairs locked. The 30mm cannon thundered, stitching fire into the ridge. Seconds later, mortar tubes flew skyward, men scattering in panic. Below, the platoon surged forward, grateful for the cover. Dorsey led them through the wash, every muscle tensed, the earth still trembling from Falcon's strafing run. His boots slipped on loose gravel, but adrenaline kept him upright. The canyon narrowed, shadows deepening, the air cold despite the blaze of noon overhead. General Elias Corrin's voice cracked onto the secure line from the command post miles away. "Falcon 1, identify the unregistered contact. Who authorized this frequency?" Raynor hesitated. His eyes flicked to the fuel gauge, 1,200 pounds, low warning flashing amber. He keyed the mic. "Command, Falcon 1, intermittent contact assisting ground platoon. Suggest maintaining channel." "Negative," Corrin snapped. "Cut her off. Secure protocols demand—" "Unable," Raynor interrupted, eyes narrowing as tracer fire reached for him from the ridge. "They're alive because of her." Another silence. Then Shadow returned as if she had never left. "Falcon 1, you're high on your last pass. Drop to 500 feet. Fire along the ridge west side. Time it between my shots." On the ground, Dorsey blinked, his rifle slack in his hands. "Her shots," he muttered, but then the crack of suppressed fire echoed faintly across the canyon. One enemy gunner fell silent, then another. He swore under his breath. Whoever she wasn't bluffing. Ortiz glanced up, fear and awe mingling in his face. "She's out there," he whispered. "On the ridge. She's in this with us." Falcon 1 dove, so low the rush of his engines pressed the platoon flat against stone. Cannon bursts erupted in tandem with the faint coughs of Shadow's rifle. Enemy positions shattered in perfect rhythm, each gap in fire filled by her steady precision. The men dared to hope. For the first time since dawn, the valley wasn't just a grave waiting to be filled, but hope lasted only minutes. New reinforcements surged from the northern rise, their shouts carried by the wind. Fresh machine gun nests barked into life, cutting across the wash. The platoon dove for whatever cover they could find. Momentum halted again. Dorsey cursed under his breath, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. "Shadow to Viper actual." Her voice came sharp, almost urgent now. "Ambush incoming North Ridge. Keep your men down." Dorsey shouted for them to hold. Then the world cracked open. Mortar shells arced high, delayed explosions chasing the platoon like predators. The earth bucked, throwing men off their feet, choking them in clouds of dust. Falcon 1 banked hard, HUD flashing, fuel low. He knew command was watching, demanding he break off, but he couldn't. Not with those voices below, not with her voice on the line. He skimmed the ridge at suicidal altitude, cannon roaring, his jet rattling under the strain. "Falcon 1, you are violating—" Corin's voice cut across, furious. Rayner ignored him. "Shadow, mark me targets." She did, calm, steady, as if the war belonged to her alone. Then it happened. The midpoint no one wanted. Shadow's shots rang out louder this time, not masked by the cannon. Enemy eyes tracked the flash on the ridge. Within seconds, return fire ripped the rocks where she hid. Dust plumes rose, sparks danced. For the first time, the platoon realized she wasn't untouchable. She was flesh and bone, hunted now. "Shadow, you're exposed!" Rayner barked into the net. But her answer came firm. "Stay on mission. Keep your eyes up." Dorsey saw her then, a figure silhouetted for a heartbeat against the sky, rifle steady, hair whipping in the wind. She dropped an enemy fighter with a single clean shot, saving him as rounds chewed stone inches from his head. He froze, heart hammering. She had been real all along. The platoon stared, stunned by her audacity, awe mixed with dread. If they could see her, so could every enemy gun in the valley. "Falcon 1, she called, voice clipped. "Final run, I'm running dry." Rayner checked his own stores. Winchester, out of ordnance. He clenched his jaw, the cockpit buzzing with warnings. Fuel bleeding away, weapons spent, but he stayed overhead, shielding them with his presence alone. Below, Dorsey pressed himself into the dirt, shaken but alive. She had saved him with one pull of the trigger. He wanted to call out, to ask who she was, why she risked everything, but the words died in his throat. There was no time, no room for anything but survival. The fight raged on, but something had shifted. No longer was Shadow just a voice in static. She was there, flesh and fire, risking the same death that stalked them all. The platoon's trust in her solidified, fragile and desperate, as the valley closed in again. And somewhere beyond the smoke, Rayner knew the moment of reckoning was coming, when either they all got out, or none of them did. The battle was far from over, and in the growing silence between bursts of fire, the shadow guiding them had become more than a voice. The last magazine clicked empty, and silence felt more dangerous than the gunfire. Viper Actual pressed his back against the shattered rock, sweat stinging his eyes, his chest heaving as if the canyon walls themselves were crushing the air from him. Around him the platoon looked hollowed, helmets tilted low, Rifles clutched with the futility of men who knew there was nothing left to chamber. Dust floated in shafts of pale light breaking over the valley rim, making the battlefield feel more like a tomb than a fight. Falcon One's voice had been steady until now, but when the radio crackled again, it came with the edge of inevitability. Falcon 1. Fuel at bingo. I have to break. The words punched through every man on the ground. Overhead, the roar of engines that had been their shield began to fade, wings banking away, leaving them naked in the canyon. Enemy fire slackened, as if the fighters on the ridgeline had sensed the same truth, that nothing stood between them and the trapped men but a dying hope. Shadow came back on frequency, her voice quiet, stripped of anything but intent. Move now. Follow the ridgeline east. You have 5 minutes. No one questioned. There was nothing left but obedience. They stumbled forward, feet dragging through loose shale, rifles dangling like weights. Ortiz clutched the radio as if it were lifeblood, eyes darting toward the ridgeline where the enemy waited. The air smelled of cordite and sun-baked stone, of sweat ground into fabric that hadn't been washed in weeks. Then Shadow again, urgent, sharper than before. Stop, ambush, position ahead, wait for my mark. The platoon froze in ragged silence. Hearts thudded against ribs. Somewhere above, the clicking cough of enemy machine guns adjusting position echoed off the canyon face. A mortar whined, distant at first, then closer, then impact. 3 seconds later, a bloom of earth just short of their line. Men flinched, expecting the next to walk in closer. Shadow's voice cut through the ringing in their ears. Charges set. On my mark, run. They didn't ask who had set charges. They didn't ask how she had slipped behind the enemy unseen. They only waited, trembling in the dust until the sound came. A single, muffled pop, then a rolling thunder as the canyon wall itself groaned and tore away. Boulders the size of trucks cascaded down, swallowing gun nests, crushing the path into a roar of grinding stone and choking dust. Screams of men caught in the collapse were lost beneath the avalanche. Go! The platoon surged forward, lungs burning, eyes streaming with grit. They stumbled through the haze, over loose rock, past broken weapons jutting from the rubble. The canyon beyond opened like a narrow throat leading toward freedom. Behind them, the enemy line was gone, entombed in the collapse Shadow had orchestrated. By the time they reached the extraction grid, Echo 7, their bodies felt carved from lead. Choppers thundered in low, rotor wash hammering their helmets flat. Medics dragged them aboard, one by one, like sacks too heavy to lift. Ortiz collapsed against the cabin wall, radio still clutched to his chest. Dorsey stared at his own blood-soaked sleeve as if surprised to still be breathing. None of them spoke Shadow's name. Inside the command tent back at the FOB, General Curran stood rigid over the map table. His jaw was stone, eyes sharp as bayonets. The survivors sat slumped in metal chairs, skin pale, hands still shaking. The silence was heavier than the battle they'd survived. Corin's gaze locked on Falcon 1, still in flight gear, helmet tucked beneath one arm. His voice was iron. Who saved them? The tent seemed to shrink with the question. The platoon looked to the pilot, searching for words they couldn't speak. Falcon 1's hand trembled, just enough for the helmet to shift against his hip. His eyes flicked toward an empty chair at the end of the table. He raised his hand and pointed. His voice dropped so low it was barely a breath, a whisper meant to carry the weight of every life spared. Her name. Shadow was gone by then. Her frequency dead, rifle abandoned somewhere in the dust of that valley. No one knew if she had survived the collapse she had summoned. No one knew if they would ever hear that voice again. But the silence she left behind filled the room more than her presence ever could. Outside, the chopper rotors faded into night. Inside, the men who had been pulled back from the brink sat with heads bowed, carrying gratitude like a burden too heavy to speak aloud. For them, she was more than a phantom. She was the reason they were alive, And though command demanded answers, though records would remain blank, the pilot's whisper would be the only truth that mattered. Because some names are not meant for paper. They are meant for reverence, carried only in silence, remembered only by those who owed them everything. And in the hush that followed, every man in that tent understood. The war would move on, but her shadow would never leave them. And somewhere beyond the ridge lines, where the dust still settled on broken stone, the mountains themselves seemed to hold her secret.